Boru Aboye. You remember how you went to school for 12, 16, maybe 20 years and you learned the boiling point of water, you learned the quadratic equation, you learned the theory of relativity, you learned how to write a 5-point essay, and you learned about the Gettysburg Address, and you learned about different layers of soil, different kinds of clouds. Remember that? But you didn't learn how to fix your own car or how to do your own taxes or balance your checkbook. You didn't learn how to start a business. You didn't learn what to do when you get a headache or when you get a stomach ache. You didn't learn any of that. You didn't learn why you have mood swings or how to communicate your deepest, fears and desires to the people who you love most. You didn't learn any of that after 20 years of school. And then you were in religion. And you were raised in religion. A lifetime in religion. You learned the 100 names of the Supreme Being. You learned the different, angelic beings, the saints. You learned different layers of heaven. You learned all different categories of demons. You learned chapter and verse of the Holy Book. You learned that the objective was to be saved and go to heaven. But you never learned where heaven was exactly. You never learned how to actually communicate with your spirit. You didn't learn the difference between your soul and your spirit. You learned about the Creator, but you never learned about your relationship to the creation. And the ancestors, even less. Chances are you were taught that your ancestors were somehow not good. Certainly forgotten, but maybe even not good. If you were trying to communicate with the ancestors, remember that? And then you came into Orisha lifestyle, and you know what? You did the exact same thing. You learned all the different manifestations of Shanko and all the different emanations of Oshun. You learned 20 different drum beats for Eshu and 30 medicines for this and 20 medicines for that and 10 different verses of Ifa for the other. You learn to talk all about destiny, right? But you never learn what the actual definition of destiny is. You've never learned the differentiation between destiny and fate and how the two interact with one another, if at all. You've learned lots of trivia, but you've had very minimal to no training and in actual spiritual development. How to do and be a spiritual being is just not being taught to you. Okay? And I'm saying this not to criticize and not to point fingers and not to snub my nose at anybody, and certainly not to criticize or dismiss the validity of our practice in our tradition. Not at all. Quite the contrary. I'm saying what I'm saying out of real love and respect, not only for the tradition, but for our ancestors. Our ancestors gave entirely too much for you to go into the practice and the tradition with your eyes closed. People like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass, Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, these people gave entirely too much for us to be pretending that we can start off completely blind, completely clueless, go to Africa, go to Brazil, go to Cuba for 2 weeks and come back, and now we're on the path. We know our destiny. No, you don't. You don't even know anybody who can define destiny. You don't even know anybody who has realized their destiny and is demonstrating their destiny deliberately and purposefully, and showing you this is destiny and this is the way you can realize your destiny and fulfill your destiny. That's not what's happening. You're coming away with beads and pots and titles and vocabulary. Okay? It isn't proper. And this is inspired in large part because I'm a teacher. I'm an educator, right? And if we were to spiritualize it, the spirit, the soul of the educator, the ancestor, the educational ancestor that I identify with is Booker T. Washington. And so he's been, communicating to me. And there's one passage from one of my favorite books that's called Working with the Hands by Booker T. Washington. And he says, in my opinion, we cannot begin at the top to build a race any more than we can begin at the top to build a house. If we try to do this, we shall reap in the end the fruits of our folly. Booker T. Washington. We cannot begin to develop our spirits from the top. We got to start from the roots. You got to start from the inside out. There can be no talk of destiny without self-discovery. You can't talk about destiny and not be able to talk about self-discovery. You can't talk about self-discovery and not be able to identify your natural gifts and talents. You can't. It's impossible to be talking about your destiny without talking about your natural gifts and talents. You can't do it. I don't care how many beads and pots and titles you have. You cannot talk about destiny if you don't know how to then practice and develop your skills associated with your natural gifts and talents. Destiny is not an instant thing. You got to be able to identify where you are in the spectrum of self-mastery. You can't talk about destiny and not be talking about stages of development of self-mastery. It just doesn't make sense. You cannot talk about destiny. You cannot talk about destiny if you do not know who you serve. Listen to me. This is the folly that Booker T. Washington is talking about. Okay? Talking all about Shango and Obatala and all these different emanations of this and that and verses and all, that is building the house from the top down. It makes no sense. So I want to urge you in the most sincere and loving way that I possibly can, but without leaving any room for doubt. Respect your ancestors. Respect those great men and women who lived and died to go and oversee your development, your transformation, and your self-realization from the heavenly realm, from the unseen realm, from the great beyond. They died so that you have the opportunity to call yourself an African American and to define African American from the inside out. Don't disrespect that sacrifice by going into this with your eyes closed and pretending that these accoutrements are a replacement for actual lived experience. Aboru aboye, aboshishe.